Next week is probably a big week for you. Most Somalis in Wales come from the former British colony of Somaliland, which 30 years ago unilaterally declared its independence from Somalia, its merger with the adjacent former Italian colony. Since then, it's experienced 30 years of relative peace, but still isn't recognised by the international community. Matthew Gordon is from SOAS University of London. He's worked in Somaliland with the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and the National Development of Somaliland. Eid Ali Ahmed is from Cardiff and is advisor to the Somaliland government. Good morning to you both. Matthew Gordon, to begin with, have I got the history roughly right there? This is a country which is functioning, effective, but unrecognised.
Yes, precisely. Yes. So Somaliland actually was, as you said, formerly a British protectorate, and in 1960 gained an initial independence before 5 days later joining with the Italian Somali colony to form what is the United Somalia. And during that time, it was a kind of frothy union, in which Somaliland eventually became ruled by a military government, which was extremely oppressive and authoritarian, and denied Somalilanders even those basic freedoms. And eventually, and when Somalilanders resisted, things escalated to the point where the government responded by instigating indiscriminate war against the entire population, bombing cities to the ground, killing about 50,000 people, mostly civilians, and sending over 500,000 people to refugee camps. And so this is kind of the context in which Somaliland was formed. So in 1991, as a result of the resistance, the government in Mogadishu fell, the Somali government fell, and Somalilanders found themselves now left to their own devices. And so they had one of the options on the table was to resurrect this idea of the Somaliland territories that is inherited from the British, and that is the path it went down. Yes,
and it's proved, I mean, not an unalloyed success. Any developing country has problems, but when you compare it to the rest of Somalia, it has to be seen as a success story.
Oh, precisely. I mean, it's literally and figuratively two different countries. It's been 30 years since the state collapsed, since they were joined, and they've gone in completely different directions. As you say, it's been, there's been fits and starts to the Somaliland state building, but on the whole, it's been very impressive. There was a decade of peace and reconciliation conferences that were very inclusive, led by the grassroots. And the outcome of this was the creation of a state, a hybrid state, as some would call it, that combined elements of the customary forms of conflict resolution and of authority that Somalis inherited from long ago, and it combined this with modern forms of statehood like a presidency, bicameral legislature, judiciary, functioning police force, and today you have a very stable and peaceful state that holds democratic elections, as we're about to witness.
And yet unrecognized. And one can sort of see why people like the African Union would turn around and say, look, the last thing we want to do in Africa is to bring up the question of these random lines that were drawn on maps by former colonial powers. But that must be frustrating for people in Somaliland to have built this state and not to have international recognition.
Of course, it's extremely difficult. I mean, there's a sense that Somalilanders feel a bit let down by its allies, the UK, the US, who not only has Somaliland proven to be Somaliland and Somalilanders proven to be very credible and supportive actors in helping the international community maintain security, stability in the region, and upholding the democracy that governments like the UK champion. And yes, while they've developed good partnerships with these countries and get development aid, which are very appreciative of, at the same time they are denied the dignity of full recognition. Meanwhile, the government in Somalia, which is unfortunately going through very, very difficult times, but doesn't have much ability to enforce its authority, is granted aid, is granted legitimacy, is granted a seat at the UN, and this creates a kind of feeling of being isolated and marginalized and forgotten.
Eid Ali Ahmed, good morning to you. The connections between South Wales and Somaliland go back 150 years more. There is a very long-standing Somali community in Wales. How do they view the situation from here?
As you said, there has been a long, relations between Wales and Somaliland, and the Somaliland community here has been here for a long time as well. And the way they see it, is, since 1991, campaigning, Somaliland to be recognized, and the way they see it is very, very unfair and injustice. And they have the legitimacy, the Somali people back home, to be recognized. And we here in Wales, we were very, very thankful, and we are very thankful, to the politicians here like Michael, Stephen Doty, and and also the Carib Council, they symbolically, recognized, Somaliland. Therefore, in Wales, we have a very, very good, support, Somaliland to be recognized, and we are building on that. But in fact, the Somaliland community here, the way they see it, this is injustice, and unfair, and because we were two different countries, in 1962, 26 June, when we, got the independence we got from the British government, the Queen, proclaimed it, that, and announced it, that Somaliland is, a country and got the independence. And one of the statements of the Queen, at that time was, the relationship between Somaliland and Great Britain will be fair,
Yeah.
And now we are saying the British government knew about the borders and all this, and they know about Somaliland. Therefore, why not Her Majesty government, spearhead, the recognition of Somaliland and convince?
I guess the reason for that, Mr. Ahmed, is that Britain doesn't want to seem to be neo-colonial, and that they're taking the lead from the African Union, and the African Union won't recognize it. That's the difficulty.
I think that, as a Somalilanders, and me, as a, Somalilander, as well as, a Welsh, national, we see that unfair. And because the reason we are saying that is, comparing, for example, Scotland, 2014, there was a referendum, they want to be within, a union, or whether to be independent, and the verdict was, that the people, they said, we want to be in the union. Why not Somaliland people who, decided their, destiny at international level, not, respected, that. We see this as sort of, if I say, a sort of apartheid, that the Somali people, back home feeling. And the union, when we say, they have their own problems. And then 2005, there was a delegation by the union, and they declared that Somaliland has the right, to be recognized. But since then, they back it off, Therefore, we don't trust, that there's, justice there, Therefore, we are saying the British government, who was ex-colonial, who knows Somali, for 8 years, Somaliland people were under that empire, and know the borders, know the culture, know the connection. Why not really spearhead and this, and the way we, as a, academician as well, and practitioner, and advisor to Somali government, and I was advisor to the, to the National Assembly here. I was the director of the Welsh Refugee Council. I'm a founder of that. What we are saying, is Somaliland people are looking the British government, to do justice.
Thank you, Eid Ali Ahmed and Matthew Gordon, and the story of Somaliland. Well, no, let's have a look at the morning papers and a find here to review them for us this morning. Ruth Masalski, political editor of Wales Online, and Gavin Thompson, editor of the National website, and now in print as well. Good morning to you both.